Hi, everyone. Welcome to Two Bald Guys Talking Safety. I'm Langdon DeMint.
And I'm Julian Taylor.
And welcome to our podcast. Welcome, everyone, to the Two Bald Guys podcast. I'm Langdon DeMint, and I'm here with my dear friend, Julian Taylor. How are you, buddy?
Hey, I'm good. How are you, Langdon?
I'm good. It's been a busy couple of weeks, busy couple of days, as we're now getting close to the holiday seasons. How are things on your end?
All good. We got a chance to catch up, which was great. Langdon had a bit of a flying visit to the UK, so we had a chance to catch up down in the smoke, as they say over here.
Yeah, it's funny. It's funny. Don't you wish that you could almost record or release both of them? So the last time we did a podcast, if you recall, everyone, we were side by side. I wish that they came out like almost at the same time, because then it's like I'm there in London.
Teleported back to Nashville.
Yeah, magically I wouldn't be. So, but it was good. I enjoyed our time together, and being able to be there in person always, I think, makes it a little bit of a different feel on the podcast. So
yeah, we'll go back to our team and we'll get them to work on the teleporting and see if we can make that a thing.
Make a little black magic.
Yeah.
But no, it was again a great being together, and great. Hopefully, everyone was able to pick up a little bit from that podcast. And as we're kind of shifting, hopefully, if you're not aware, we have one that we've done with EHS Daily. And in regards to that podcast, we were talking about, every year, at the end of every year, what do we hear, Jules? It's always what?
Trends. Blah, 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 trends.
And, it's almost it's like the little violin, you get a little bit, and it stinks, but it's always the same trends. Usually. I mean, valid, there's some different ones. But if we talk about from a health and safety trends of what's happening from an incident standpoint, I mean, as far as incidents in the US, and I know it's pretty applicable over there in the UK as well, incidents and citations from OSHA or focuses, it's always the same thing. And I'm not negating that. It's the same, because that means there's usually some still needed attention to those areas. But why don't we shift it a little bit, and instead of having a discussion on the same old trends, our HAZCOM, our slip, trip, and falls, that we got to talking and thinking, what if we transition that a little bit? And I think it's more of, what are some things that we could focus on? So what are some top focuses, if you will, for next year? Yeah, top tips. Tips.
There you go.
Yeah. So what are some top tips that we have for 2023? And again, when you listen to the podcast for the EHS Daily, you will hear a little more of a broad perspective. So we've kind of picked a few of the areas that we think might be worth focusing on, of how we can drive some, again, continuous improvement, maybe even a little change management. And honestly, when we talk about that, it's even into the granular level within your organization. So we've decided, let's spend a few minutes to actually dive into that and discuss in regards to that topic. Jules, what do you think? You want to jump in? You want to lead us?
Shall I lead in? Yeah.
Yeah, you take the first one.
I'll lead in, and I'm going to go to town on the sort of, I suppose, the thing that I've done for 20 years, which is training.
See, that's why I teed it up for you. See,
there you go. Thank you very much. So I suppose I had a bit of a light bulb moment over the last few months, which was, you look at the approach to training that we take in so many cases, and I'm going to suggest that it's ineffective. And I hold my hands up. I've delivered that kind of training, and I've dragged groups of people into a training room for 3-day sessions, bombarded them with information, and thought and hoped that they would take that away and then put it into practice. And then we wonder why it doesn't happen. And I think if you just reflect on yourselves, reflect on what the sort of trainings that you've done, the trainings where you've gone for a day, you've been away from the workspace, you've done a day of training. That knowledge isn't immediately put into practice. You go back to the workplace. When you do need to put it into practice, you know it's in there somewhere, but you can't drag it out. You can't you can't remember the detail of it. And the example I always give is Excel. I've done countless Excel training courses, and I've learned some amazing stuff, Langdon. But ask me to create a pivot table at the moment, and you
Hey,
could be you
Jules,
could be
I took a whole semester on biostatistics.
yeah.
I mean, now valid, it was 12 years ago, but even right after, I
Yeah.
understand.
Yeah, yeah. So I think one of the tips for 2023 is let's stop just doing the same old things in terms of training. And I know the world moved on with e-learning, but I think what e-learning, whilst it helped, didn't resolve that problem. In that we take people away, we sit and we force knowledge into them. And the thing that I'm passionate about is coaching. And actually, I think that's one of my top tips for 2023 is actually start to think about how you can create a culture of coaching across your organization. And that can apply to any form of learning. It's not just health and safety, but actually that relationship where you've got leaders, managers, supervisors, coaches, whoever it might be, but actually spending time with people at the point of work and actually talking with them about the way that they approach their work is far more powerful than just using training in isolation. We still need to train people. We can't get away from the fact that there are certain things we need to train people on. But actually, the really critical piece is how do we then reinforce that training in the real world? So one of my things is coaching. And I think one of the things we've been really successful with as a business is being coaching. And the thing that made a difference was putting into place what we call cadences. So actually, it means that each week at defined times, coaching will happen. And there might be different approaches to that coaching. So it could be role-playing things. It could be sitting down and discussing one-on-one with somebody about the way that they've approached something. It could be reviewing training materials, but on a one-to-one basis. So there are different approaches, but it means that every week people know that there will be coaching sessions. And again, as part of that approach to coaching is look at the different levels of your organization. So we want leadership to reinforce that leadership position. We want them to coach each time they go out on the shop floor. Yeah, go and talk about safety with people. Yeah. So top tip number one, don't just train people. You've got to reinforce it and support it with effective coaching.
Yeah. And, I think to that point, that's a good one. And it's because, so you think about, I remember after I finished my master's, 12 years ago, I guess, when I went to work at a previous organization, and we did a lot of online health and safety training, in addition to consulting and other aspects. And, that was kind of that was a bridge. That was a new thing at that point, really being proactive, utilizing online training. And you would sit there and take a 45, hour-long training online, and it really seemed to kind of be a game changer. And then it transitioned, realizing, hey, it's too long sitting there. Let's change it. I'm always a big proponent, at the end of the day, of blended approach, anyways. And that's some things need to be face to face, some things have to be face to face, but some things can be online. But even with that, even if you keep doing it, if we keep trying to do it the same way, I agree. You're just trying to get something across, but is there any real life applicability to it? But if we coach them, if we kind of help them learn, kind of like that learning culture in all aspects, then it's the whole, you're getting in there with them and helping them see what could we do better? How does this really look in real life? Hey, let's get hands on. Let's talk about how do you usually do it? What could you do different? And that's I think that's definitely an improving area that we could make, because there are it's difficult when you have people that have done the job 10, 15, 20 years, and you're trying to talk to them about what they've already been doing, and there's not a lot of process changes.
I mean, you've just prompted a thought there, Langdon, which was actually there's just a danger with all of these things, isn't there? If we keep doing the same thing the same way all the time, you just hit fatigue. We just hit fatigue where actually people become a bit jaded and a bit unreceptive to it. So I think that's one of the sort of key things we're thinking about here is is forget about trends, but actually how can we start to think about doing things differently next year? Yeah. And we've been talking about things earlier today. I know we were having a conversation and we talked about it's almost having that critical eye on the way that you do things, looking at things and saying, right, how do I have a critical eye to say, yeah, we may have done this for a long time and it might have been effective, but is it time to change? Yeah. Is it time to freshen up? Okay.
Yeah. No, I think it's a great one. So everyone, there's our first tip to focus on. Second, and I'll take this one or lead in for this one. It's how often, maybe I'll pose it in a question. How often do we look at incidents? Do we look at what's happening? Our typical incidents. We look when something happens, maybe it's a near miss, but we don't really focus on the critical elements of that incident or critical elements of that job before we even start, or the potential that could lead to a serious injury or fatality. So basically, focus on your SIFs, your critical elements, your high hazard, because what have we seen over the last few years? Incident rates, they've dropped. That's been great when you think about it from the standpoint, if we really take a large sample size of the last 10 years or so, they've really dropped. We have seen a little bit of a plateau, but they've dropped. The last couple of years will skew those because of COVID and tracking of that, the illness perspective. But for the most part, we're doing pretty good on the routine, on the everyday incidents. But we're seeing fatalities, the serious injuries, they've moved up a little bit. So how can we better look at serious injury fatalities? How can we better look at critical elements and hazards before an incident begins? So, we talk a lot about the pre-incident investigation, and it's maybe if you don't do that process, I would highly encourage you to, but even so, start thinking about it when you're creating your JHAs, when you're creating your standard operating procedures for a job. Just kind of incorporate it into that, even if you're not at that level where you're going through and doing a full-blown, let's think about a true incident or a fault tree analysis almost before it happens. Let's think about it from that perspective. And I think if we can, before a job happens, if we can actually look and say, what are some critical elements? What are some things where this job is so serious? We know that there are some high hazards. What if we can actually look at that and figure out how can we eliminate those? One, go through our hierarchy of controls, of course. And if that's not plausible, how can we at least minimize them to, if they do fail, it fails to an acceptable level? And I think that's another key element, because we're seeing, serious injuries they're happening every day. So how can we look at the same old, which we've always done, and we're going to continue to do, and I highly encourage you to do that. Don't stop. But how can we look at that, but shift the thinking just a little bit to actually consider, and I use this example fairly regular, but to me, it's one of the easiest applicable ones. If I get on a ladder and I'm 4 rungs up and I fall on the grass, I'm probably okay, right? Most likely. If I'm on that same ladder, 4 rungs up, and I'm sitting on concrete or something more hard surface and I fall, that's a game changer. That could potentially lead to a more serious, if I hit my head there or fall right because of the texture of the ground, because of how hard it is and such, there's a more serious potential there. So it's looking at it and thinking, holistically as a whole, what does this job actually entail? So let's refocus on what we've been focusing on, but from a serious eye.
Yeah. I've got to say, I think that head is pretty hard. It'd have to be pretty hard stuff that you're hitting it on. But and I agree. And I think lots of people are already doing great stuff out there, but I think it's just a challenge to sort of rethink about the things that you're doing again, isn't it? So a lot of what we're talking about today is just rethink the things that you're already doing. And I think a lot of people, for example, if something is reported, whether it be an incident, near miss, or a hazard, they just look to resolve that thing that has happened or been reported. And what they don't do is almost have as a part of their process some form of risk assessment that says what could have happened. Yeah. So what potentially, what is the seriousness of what could have happened? And actually that might just then change the resolution that you actually come to around that thing that has been reported or been submitted.
And No, that's a great point. And actually, you saying that just kind of sparked something as I'm thinking right now. We get, I'm not going to say we have over the last few years, we've become so focused on a near miss. But we're here. We haven't, this is no pre screening. I'm throwing this out on Jules right now. Near miss to you is a what type of indicator?
It's a lagging indicator.
I would, for a while, I think, and the principle that it was a leading indicator because it was leading from the standpoint it was pre-incident with loss. But realistically, I 100% agree. It's a lagging indicator. You've seen the rusty lifting gear slide that I've used for
Yeah.
a long time. But when you think about it, the only difference from a near miss to an actual incident with loss is a split second, luck, whatever have you. So if we can actually look at those and start thinking, even more so, because near miss, if I'm just sitting here tracking near misses and looking at the SIF potential of a near miss, just exactly what you said, that's not, it can help prevent, but how many times do we have organizations now that they're getting so many near misses, they can't even keep up with it to actually track it like a full-blown incident with loss. And so I agree. I think that's when we have to figure out how can we refocus on that criticality, on that SIF potential to actually kind of take it back and be more preventative. So that was a good call, Jules.
And kind of alongside that, it's thinking about what do I do with that data? How do I manage that data? I was talking to a guy the other day, and it was spreadsheet overload. He had a spreadsheet for everything. And he just said, I can't carry on doing this because the business is getting bigger. We're just about to recruit another 100 people. So actually, part of what you've got to be saying as well is our whole approach fit for purpose? Because it doesn't matter how many near misses you get reported or how many hazards you get reported. Actually, if you haven't got the capability to then say, right, okay, let's analyze this effectively. Let's apply some risk management to it. Actually, it's futile. Yeah. Okay.
You want to take the third one?
Okay, I'll take the third one. I'm going to say let's just go back to basics. And again, it's something we talk about all the time. People in our organization laugh at me when I start talking about KISS because I talk about it so often. But it's the most misquoted phrase that has ever been misquoted, I would suggest. So it's that actually KISS stands for keep it stupidly simple. And I love that as an approach to life, mainly because if it's not simple, I struggle to do it. So but when you stop and think about so much of what we talk about, it has a direct effect on whether people are going to actually take part, whether they're going to engage, whether they're going to do things in a safe way, whether they're going to report things. I've seen over the years all sorts of wonderful risk assessments or JHAs, for example. People proudly say, look at our 7-page JHA. Well, my retort to that straight away is, do you seriously expect someone to read that? Yeah, when they're trying to do a job of work. So we have to simplify things. I've seen incident reporting forms with pages and pages. Again, the same thing. Stop and think about it from your own perspective. If you're faced with a form that's got 7 pages, what's going through your mind? Langdon, what goes through your mind? If you were faced with a form with 7 pages to complete, what goes through your mind?
What can I read to halfway understand it so I don't have to read everything? And I might, but you know what? Sometimes I show initiative and I'll start reading the first page and then I decide, no. Which goes to your point.
So, unless it's one spectacularly big box to tick on each page, most people's approach is, how can I do this or circumvent as much of this as possible?
Pictures.
Pictures. So, but that's why so many health and safety professionals end up chasing their tail and wasting time trying to gather information that they could have got in the first place if they'd simplified the process. But the probably the thing that happens most is unless there's an ambulance rocking up at the front door, people don't fill the form out. Yeah. And that applies to every single process in the health and safety management system. So if you think about people doing inspections, if you think about people doing risk assessments, fantastic example is I think is in the UK, we talk about COSH, you talk about HAZChem. Yeah. So hazardous chemical assessments. And so often what you see when you look at those is it's basically just a reproduction of the safety data sheet. Well, if you're talking to somebody working on a production line, maybe a maintenance engineer going to do a job of work on a production line, and they've got to use a chemical as a part of that process, do you seriously think they're going to read through 16 sections on a risk assessment? Not going to do it. So what you've got to do is be able to make it really succinct in terms of, right, what does that person doing that part of the job need to do? It kind of reminds me of a bit of a quick story, which was, and it happened in a healthcare environment in the UK. I was talking to a health and safety professional there, and I love her. She was fantastic because she was just really sort of to the point. And she talked about chemical assessments, and she said, if you think about a chemical, and I'd never thought about this before I spoke to her, it's a few years ago. She said a chemical in any organization has a life cycle. It's not one thing in one moment of time. So it might get delivered into a stores in a big container. You might then have some of it decanted into a smaller container to be taken to a point of work. You might then have the job that's being done with that particular chemical. You might then have some kind of waste residue at the end of it, yeah, which then has to be disposed of. And actually, each one of those is an individual task done by a different person. And that person needs to be able to look at that risk assessment and go, bang, that's what I need to know. That's the PPE I need to wear. That's how I need to handle it. Yeah. That's keeping it stupidly simple. Yeah. So I think top tip for next year is critical eye again. Take a critical eye, look at your approach to safety and say, right, what can we simplify? Because that's going to help with engagement.
I totally agree. And I think instead of even really expanding it, to me, I'll just tie that straight into our final high level, and that's how can we better make health and safety really integrated into all aspects so we have that great performance, so we have those safe operations. And I think what you said, honestly, that's a great lead in, because when you think about it, so I've done workshops on JHAs. I've created more JHAs than I even care to think about. But it is that aspect, try to keep it simple. How can we make something that might be, relatively complex? How can we break it up and put it as simple, like 5 steps, hit the high points, but hit the crucial elements? What hazards are associated, pre-post controls? How can we really do that? And you want it to be as clean as possible versus something long, because just like you said, it's that whole, when I look at that, especially if it's something I've done for a long time, I don't want to read all that, even if it's something I've missed. So when we think about it, keeping things simple will help to ensure that it gets better buy-in no matter where it is. And I think that's one of the biggest things when we think about how to better integrate health and safety, and understanding how that can help support the business right off the bat. Jules, what happens if I get injured?
You can't play golf.
Okay, well, that's true. So, side note, everybody, we can't play golf, which is the most important. But also from a work standpoint, I can't work.
Well, I mean, yeah, you can't work, and in a serious instance, it means that actually work can't work. Work has to stop.
And that's the big thing. So then we don't have to dive into all the direct, indirect costs. One's could be up to 5 times or indirect costs can be 5 times up to the straight direct cost. So we don't have to go down that, but you just think about that. There's a big number that can be associated with every incident. I love looking at for those of you that haven't I guess I'm giving a slight plug to OSHA, but their safety pays calculator. I love that thing because every couple of years it changes. They take in workers' compensation, the whatever insurance perspective. I don't remember what the official organization is called, but they take those in, so they'll update the numbers. But you can see a simple carpal tunnel. or a simple back injury, back strain, you can see the direct cost. You can put your profit margin to see how much I have to actually make as an organization to overcome that incident, how much the total cost is. So when you think about that, what does one incident matter? Not even taking into the account the actual value of the person that we've injured, but from a financial standpoint, it's huge. There's a lot of profits that we have to make to counterbalance that. So when we think, why does health and safety actually matter within an organization? Well, it matters because most times you're only a second away from an incident, and you're only another second away from that being even more of a serious incident, especially when we're, and right now we're what? Technically, I guess we're in a recession. Are we going into a deeper recession? Are we coming out? I don't know, but things can be tough. So one of the most sustainable things we can do is maintaining our workers.
Yeah, and I think kind of aligned to that, just to sort of wrap things, Langdon, I think is actually next year, I think for health and safety people to get a better understanding, get a better grip of how safety, actually good safety, supports your business in terms of better business performance. I mean, and the reason I talk about that is I think health and safety people need to become influencers. Yeah, they need to become influencers so they can draw in the other teams, the other departments, and we can actually start to drive that safe operations, that approach of safe operations. But also, when you stop and think about safety, so much of it is actually reliant on investment. You need investment into equipment, into processes, into people. There's lots of investment that is actually needed if you're going to move up that maturity scale and you're going to be great at safety. And I don't think I'm being unfair to call this out here and say that traditionally safety people haven't been great influencers when it comes to trying to get that budget. So I think that's one of my challenges is think about, if you can understand how actually, if we can improve safety performance, we keep the factory running, but also we retain our people, we have an effect on quality, we have an effect on productivity. If you can start to capture that more effectively, that's such a key part in any business case that you're going to need to take to your senior leadership to say, we need to do something.
Yeah. No, because it's tough because we're not salespeople, but from a health and safety perspective, you have to have that art of selling, because I have to sell the value of health and safety and why this even matters every day. That's a fantastic point you brought up, because we have to then, and that's one of the, I will say, when I'm out, with working with organizations, when I was out in the field a lot, one of the best things that I would always try to do, you're going to appreciate this, was creating camaraderie. And but I say that, jokingly, but at the same time, it was walking around, getting to know, hey, John, how's your kids? How's the family? How, whatever, XYZ going. It's because letting them know, hey, I care, building that rapport with everyone so that we can take it to that next step. And that's why we always say it's not a safety culture. I'm not a safety culture proponent, because there's a business culture. But how can we ensure that safety is embedded in all aspects? How can we ensure that safe operations is the heart? Because then, just like you said, our productivity, our quality, our health and safety, they're all together. It's one. And that's when you start seeing that change. So I have to, as a safety professional, and hopefully you as well, listeners, for the safety professionals out there, it's how can you better influence your frontline employees, your frontline supers, your managers, your leadership. So you have leaders throughout, you have champions throughout that actually talk of why health and safety, why it actually matters. And, putting it back to the basics, I think that's why we put that as one of the key tips for next year. That actually helps for that overall premise of putting it or ingraining it within your organization.
I don't think you meant to, but I think you came up with another great top tip there, though, which was actually, if you stop and think about what you're trying to achieve here, we're trying to achieve safe operations, want people to buy in. How's that going to work if you only go and talk to people when something's gone wrong or when you need something doing? So I think that tip of actually go and build relationships, go and build that camaraderie is really important. Yeah. So actually, what you want is a group of people out there who don't say, oh, it's the safety guy coming. They say, oh, it's Julian coming, or it's Langdon coming, or it's John, or whoever it might be, or Sue. What they do is they see you as a person, and you've got a relationship with them, because if you've got that relationship, you're in a far stronger position to say, can we try something? Can we do something?
Yeah, it's great.
Okay.
Well, everyone, those are our top tips for 2023. We could have more. Jules really likes to talk. I do too occasionally. So we could have a lot more. We tried to narrow it down. If you haven't listened to the EHS Daily podcast, I would encourage you to go check it out. If you have, and now you're listening to this one, hopefully you have gotten a little more insight into some of our top tips for 2023. If you would like more tips, give us a call. We'll probably come up with more for you, because there are a lot more, let's be fair.
If somebody suggests that you listen to anything that talks about trends for 2023, just say no. Go and listen to the Bald Guys. They'll give you some tips.
Exactly. And then go back and listen to the trends. I'm sure there's something maybe different, but exactly. So, Jules, it was good catching up. I enjoyed a few minutes with you.
Good to see you. Good to see you teleported back to Nashville, back to your family.
Yep. Very DeLorean-ish. Back to the future style.
And we will speak again soon. I'll just call you Doc Brown.
I accept.
Thank you.
Everyone, have a safe day. See y'all.
Bye.
Hey everyone, really appreciate you tuning into this episode of Two Bald Guys Talking Safety. Please follow and subscribe to wherever you stream your favorite podcast, or visit us at evotix.com.
And if you want to see how follically challenged we really are, come and check us out on YouTube. If you've got value from the podcast, please go to Apple Podcasts, and in the review section of this podcast, if you could leave us a review or a rating, that would be great.
And as always, everyone, while you're going about your days and about your normal lives, stay safe out there and watch each other's back.